one big problem, and that is that a lot of companies, who didn't want to make the transition from 200 millimeter to 300 millimeter, that kind of gave a huge boost to the foundry fabless sector, because a lot of IDMs decided not to make the transition and to become fabless for these new nodes. So you had companies like Texas Instruments, who decided that they would still have their IDM business model for the older technology, but they wouldn't develop advanced technology. They would use TSMC or Samsung to build those products there. So they became fabless. And so a lot of the traditional customers for the advanced wafer fab equipment started to shrink down until you ended up with a very small number of customers. And therefore it became unattractive for the equipment companies to want to make that transition to 450 millimeter, because the cost of it was not going to be covered by their customers. The customers didn't want to fund it, and the equipment manufacturers didn't want to make it. So even though you could see the benefit theoretically of 450 millimeter, there was no financial business incentive for either partner to want to do that. So it kind of fell into this Mexican standoff, whereas neither side would want to blink first and make the transition to build the big wafer. So all that the equipment companies did was they said, all of these improvements that we're developing on a 450 millimeter platform to do the new nodes, to do the new process improvements, to get the linearity across a 450 millimeter substrate. If we can do it on 450 millimeter, we can do it even better on 300 millimeter. So they simply implemented all of those technological improvements on their 300 millimeter equipment and came out with a second generation revised 300 millimeter equipment line that was absolutely state of the art and would do anything technically that the industry wanted to do. So there was no technological imperative to make the transition like there was on 300 millimeter, and the market just simply evaporated. So the wafer was kicked into the sideline. Lithography suddenly went from being a per wafer process to a per die process. And you only gain the real wafer advantage, the wafer size advantage, on processes that are per wafer, because you do one process step and you cover 450 millimeters. Two process steps would cover the equivalent number of 300 millimeter wafers. So your capacity, your throughput, your manufacturing efficiency on a per wafer basis is what is crucial. But if you're printing per die with a stepper, it doesn't matter how big the wafer is. The time to print per die is the same, whether it's a small wafer or a big wafer. Okay, you got the wafer handling, the moving the wafer onto the platter. That's a finite time, but it's small compared with the actual processing time. So the cost, you had no cost advantage on lithography. And lithography was increasingly more and more steps, from 20 layers to 60, 70, 80 layers. And so the proportion of stepping processing cost was going up and up and up. The number of per layer processing was pretty much not quite constant, but going up much less rapidly. So the cost advantage was beginning to disappear. No longer did you have this 40% cost advantage. Suddenly it was only 20%. That wasn't sufficient to really push that process through. We always knew that conventional photographic lithography using ultraviolet light was going to reach the end of its usefulness. That was always pretty clear because it's physics. And although they played lots of tricks with immersion technology and all sorts of error correction techniques, and pushed the light well beyond its theoretical physical capability by using various processing tricks and techniques. Eventually, and quad patterning and double patterning, these add cost, they slow down capacity. Because if you have to do quad patterning 4 lithography steps to do what you did in one, you get a quarter of the capacity. Okay, the throughput drops by 4. To process one wafer, it takes 4 times as long, because you're having to do those steps 4 times rather than 1 time. So we knew we had to go to a new light source, which was the EUV technology. But the industry didn't want to do that because it was a new technology and they liked light because they knew how to do light. They didn't know how to do EUV. And so all the while light was pushing EUV further and further out, that the EUV was kind of very slow in coming. But ASML developed that technology, got it working, got it right, and now it is in volume production at the node, but one technique was where it was introduced at the N7 kind of node, and now it's 100% on the N5 node in TSMC and in Samsung's equivalent. And it's being used in some memory manufacturers simply because you don't have to do the quad patterning with light now, and you can get still better function patterns with the EUV. We've had to do it because we have now really no choice. We reached the crossroad, we pushed it as far as we could, and now we have to make the left turn rather than, because there is a brick wall ahead on the right turn. We had no choice.